Yes, and now I would like to say welcome to you, all of you, here in Odense. We are sending broadcasting from here to both Agerskov and I know there are some spots around Denmark also listening and looking to these presentations. Today we will hear two very nice and interesting presentations first from Gunner Sørensen from SEGES. He will present himself, I guess. And after that, Dall from Vilofoss that will present some data from a farm. We made a very interesting trial out there in this winter time. And there will be at the end time for questions, I believe. And so if you have questions out there, you can send them on the chat. I will have a look there and then send the questions on to the presentations. So welcome to you, Gunner, at first, and welcome out there.
Thank you very much, and thank you to Fokus for the invitation to come here today. And the topic is feeding, and we are talking about gilt feeding, and we are talking about feeding in the gestation period. Two very, very important topics. And the main reason why especially feeding of the gilts is very important now is because of the breeding improvement of the gilts. Today we see very fast-growing animals, we see high meat percentage, we see a very, very good feed conversion. And of course all these things happens because the reason why we have the pigs is because we are going to produce pork, going to produce slaughter pigs. But some of the pigs we also have to use in the production, as sows and boars. And that's the main reason why we have to try to change a little in the body of these animals. Otherwise, they will never perform as good production animals. This is what we are going to talk about today. You see, this is like a puzzle. You have a lot of things, you have to put them in the right correction to have the full picture. And this is what I'm trying to give you for the next 30 minutes. We start talking about the gilts, and we are talking about feeding, and we are talking about how the size of the body at first service affect the longevity of these animals. And then we are talking about the pregnant sows, especially about the nutrition, the feed curve, etc., and how it affects the animal afterwards. But let's start with the gilt. The case that we have this 30-kilo animal, and we decide to continue feeding it like it was a slaughter pig. Then actually, when this animal is 31 weeks old, the weight will be around 200 kilos, and the back fat will be about 12 millimeters. So they will be very, very huge, these animals. Another possibility is, of course, to try to feed them restricted, to reduce the daily intake, and still give them plenty of protein and lysine for growth. Then, of course, we can reduce the weight of the animal at first service, but we also reduce the back fat of this animal. And that is neither a good solution. The next one is to feed them ad libitum, but reduce the level of protein. And now, because of the low protein, there will not be amino acids available for protein growth, meat growth of the animal. So they will reduce the daily gain, and they will increase the back fat. In this case, we can also create an animal with a weight of about 150 to 160 kilos at first service. And we can also increase the back fat of this animal. But ad libitum feeding is not a good solution for an animal because it causes ulcers. If you have this ad libitum feeding, you also see more and more ulcers with the animals, and this is neither a good thing for a coming sow. So what we go for is what we call a compromise, and in this case we say that we want to go for this weight, 150 to 165 kilos, and we want a back fat of 13 to 15 millimeters. So this is the ideal animal. And how can you create this animal? In the early days, we actually recommend to use one diet from 30 to 110 kilos. But today, with the modern genetics, it's a no-go, because you can't use just one diet. The main reason is that in this period, when they are very young, you undersupply them so much with protein and amino acids. And when you undersupply an animal, and a young animal, they start getting aggressive, and they're looking for some proteins. Where can I find some proteins? I can't eat straw, but I can eat the tails and the ears of my neighbors. Then I get some protein. So normally, when you undersupply with amino acids and protein, you see problem with tail biting, you see problem with ear biting. And that's a no-go. That's the reason why we say absolutely no for this. Actually, you had to use 3 different diets. At the beginning, we use a lactation feed, meaning that it's the same diet you use for your lactating cow. And we say from 30, maybe a little more than 30 kilos, but from 30 to 60 kilos. And in this case, it's not a problem feeding them ad libitum. The next period is from 60 to 110 kilos. And here we recommend to use 6-0 in lysine. And in this case, it's a mix of 50-50 of a lactating and a gestating diet. So it's a 50-50 mix. And after 110 kilos, this is where they start growing fat, we reduce the lysine to 4 grams digestible. This is the level we use in the gestation period to reduce the daily gain of the animals. In this case, of course, it's a gestation diet, so you already have this diet in your farm. So this is the 3 diets you're going to use. What about the feed curves? How much feed should you give to them every day? In the yellow area here, this is where we use the diet with 7.7, the lactation diet. We recommend to follow a feed curve like this. It could also be a more aggressive feed curve if necessary, with more ad libitum. Then when they reach the weight of average about 60 kilos, then you switch to the other diet and you continue with this feed curve up to about 110 kilos, and at this level they will be to 3.4 feed units, 4.5 kilos a day, something like that. This is the top. And if you go maybe 3-4 years back, actually the top was lower, but you have to go up, because if you're going to grow fat, you need some energy to grow fat. And that's the main reason why we call it the fat hop. We go up because we want more fat on the animals. And why do we want this fat? It's because fat is a buffer. If the animal needs energy, it's like us, me for instance, if I need extra energy, I take it from the fat, and the sows do exactly the same, especially when she's lactating and needs a lot of energy. And if she has some fat left, she will start taking the fat. If she don't have any fat, she's going to use the muscles. And when she uses the muscles, she loses much more weight, because she needs 4 times more kilos of the body when she uses the muscles instead of fat. So then you see extremely large weight loss of your sows. I guess you have seen it in the lactation period. If you have a gilt, very good milking gilt, no fat left, and she loses extremely lot of weight in the end. So don't do that. That's not good for the animal. Well, What does the weight mean for the gilt? And in this case, you can see here, we have the weight of the gilt. And when you increase the weight, you also increase the litter size. Meaning that if you increase, we have heavier gilts, you also have a higher litter size. That's a good idea. No, it's not a good idea, because it has a negative impact on the longevity. I will show you. Here we have been looking into, again, the weight at service. And here you have how many days are the animal productive in the sow herd. And you can see here that this curve goes down, meaning when you increase the weight of the animal, you have a shorter, reduced productivity. So having very heavy animals means that you have a lot shorter productive time in the farm. Actually, if you increase the weight with 16 kilos, it's about 2 months, then you will reduce the number of litters produced per sow life with 0.35. That's a lot. If we say that the animal has about 20 piglets, so it's about 7-8 piglets that she will lose just by this. And that's much more than the 0.4 you can get by increasing the weight at first service. The other one was the back fat. Exactly the same curve, but here in the bottom you have back fat, and up again you have number of productive days. And you can see when you increase the back fat, you also increase the number of productive days. And then we reach a plateau here at about 13 to 14 millimeters, where we don't increase the lifetime performance anymore. Actually, you see a little reduction when you have 2 fat gilts. So that's an optimum for the back fat too. In this case, actually, it's nearly the same figures. If you increase the back fat with 3 millimeters, actually, you increase the number of productive days with 55, and you have about 0.3 more liters in a lifetime performance. So that's a lot of productivity in focusing on having the right size of your gilts. Here we have set up all the figures. We have the light ones, we have the medium ones, and we have the heavy ones. And here you can see if you're light and you're lean, or you're light or you have medium back fat, or you're light and have a lot of back fat. So we have put up all these 3 situations. And what we have marked with green here is how does it affect the total number of piglets per sow life for the entire life of the sow. And we have also put up the figures for the number of weaned piglets per sow life. How many pigs does the sow wean during her lifetime? And in this case, you can see that there's quite a heavy difference. But especially if the gilt is very heavy, then you can see all the red ones here, meaning that it has an extremely high impact on the productivity. In this case, you can say that if you are medium or fat, you will actually increase the number of total born during your life with nearly 20 piglets per sow. That's a lot of pigs. And if you look into the number of weaned pigs, it's 14.5. You can wean more per sow life by having the right weight. If you look at the back fat, you can say if I'm light or medium in weight, but I have the right back fat, then I can increase the number of live born, total born, with about 15 per sow life. And if you're talking weaned pigs per sow, it's about 7.5. So it's a lot of pigs when you treat your gilts correctly. It's very, very important that you understand this. You have to check your gilts, right weight, right age, right back fat. not all of you has a possibility of measuring the weight, but you can have this rope that you can put around the body of the gilt, and then you can have quite a good measurement of the weight. But it's extremely important, and it will continue to be more and more important because the improvement of the breeding programs continue very, very fast. So this problem will just increase. So please take care of it now. The next step is that we are going to talk a little about the pregnant sow and how you feed them. First step here is to say how much protein is there in the feed in the gestation period. Does that affect the birth weight of your pigs? No, don't. Here you can see we have looked into an interval where we have from 3 gram digestible lysine up to 6, and you can see exactly the same weight at birth. So there's no impact on the protein. So you don't have to be afraid by reducing protein in the gestation period. That doesn't affect the weight of the piglets. What about the energy? That's the next one. In this case, it's a study we have done here in Denmark recently from 1.6 feed unit per day and up to 2.8 feed units per day. And we have been giving this amount of feed in the 10 weeks from 4 weeks after service to 4 weeks before farrowing. So you can see here we have 1.6 feed unit per day and up to 2.8. And here you can see the weight of the piglets born by the gilts or born by the sows. Of course, you know that the piglets are lighter when they're born by gilt, but in this case, it has no impact on the weight of the piglet. But still, when you have the very low level, 0.6 here, you can see actually in both cases it's a little lower. But the energy doesn't affect the birth weight. And why doesn't it do that? That's mainly because actually giving energy nutrition to the piglets, it's the most important thing for the sow, also more important than herself. So she always decides to give energy to the piglets first and then to her own body afterwards. And this is what we see when we look into what is happening with the weight, the increased weight of the sow and the gilts. In this case with the gilt, you can see when you increase the feed intake, you increase the weight of the gilt. And for the sows, you see exactly the same, more energy, more weight of the sow, as we expected. And when we look into the back fat, we see exactly the same situation. When you increase the energy, you also increase the back fat of the animal. Here you have to focus on what says 0. That means that now she don't lose weight, or she don't lose back fat, or she increase back fat. But in this situation, it will be for the gilts, it will be about a little more than 2 kilos a day. And for the sows, it will be about 2.4 or something like that. So that's what the animal needs if it's not going to lose back fat. But always she prefers the piglets before herself, and if you give her too much feed, it goes to the body, it doesn't go to the piglets. Well, what kind of feed curve are you going to use for your sows? In this study, we actually also tested different feed curves. In many situations, you are familiar with this one, where you, for the first 4 weeks, give them quite a high level, because you want to gain some weight, if the weight they have lost during the lactation period. So mainly, we have a quite high feed intake for the first 4 weeks. Then we reduce for these 8 weeks, and then for the last 4 weeks before farrowing, we increase the feed curve again. In this study, we have been trying it, instead of going as low as this, we have the same level for the whole period and don't increase in the end. So all the sows are giving 2.8 during the whole period from 4 weeks after service to farrowing. How does that affect the animals? Actually, when we look at the gilts, we can see that this case where you have 2.8 for the whole period, actually it has a positive impact on the litter size, the litter weight. And it's the same situation with the sow. Actually, you also increase the litter weight by having this flat feed curve. But when you look into the weight of the sow, when you have 3.5 compared to 2.8, well, then you increase the weight with about 6 kilos, and exactly the same with the sow. So extra energy, extra gain for the sow. And we see the same situation when we look into the back fat. So we have this situation, and what I'm going to use. If you decide to use the red one here, the flat curve, you will have a total amount of feed used, 235 feed units. And it will give you about 2 millimeters of back fat, and they will gain in average about 40 kilos. If you decided to use the other feed curve, where you go down and up again, actually it's nearly the same amount of feed you're using in this case. It's a little less. And you see a back fat 2.8, and you see a gain of weight of 42 kilos. So actually the sow reacts nearly the same way with the two feed curves. And which one I'm going to choose? Yes, it depends on what kind of feeding system do you have. If you have a system where the sows compete when they're eating, I mean floor feeding or feeding in a long trough or something like that, then it is more suitable to have the same level for the whole period instead of going up and down. Especially in this period where you have the low level, it is not a good idea that because the animal will compete too much with a reduced amount of feed, you have too much aggression and you have to take out some of the sows. And in the end, of course, you have to be careful if you're going to use this. First step is, of course, when you don't go up to 3.5, that means that you don't have that much manure and heat from the sows. So normally you have more dry pens for the sows, and you have less excretion of heat from the animals because you don't go that high in feed intake. So this is all the things you have to take into account when you decide which feed curve am I going to use. But now we start talking about the end period here, because now we're close to farrowing, and it has an impact on how you feed the animals. What we know is that the amount of digestible lysine in the period up to farrowing affect the growth of the udder and affect the milk amount produced for the sow. In this case, we can see when you increase the amount of lysine, you also increase the weight of the weight gain of the litter, meaning that the sow produces more milk. And then we have a maximum here, and it says that you need to give the animal about 20-22 grams digestible lysine per day. Then the udder get what it needs for growth and for afterwards milk production. Here we have set up a situation. If you have a maximum feed curve of 3.5, you have two different levels of lysine, and you have a feed curve, the flat feed curve, with only 2.8. And you have a low level of lysine as you normally have in your gestation diets. How much lysine is available for the animal per day? And you can see that is much less than the 22 grams I recommended. What can I do about that? Because if I don't give them enough lysine, then it has negative impact on the milk production. Of course, you you have to be at that level 7 to 10 days before farrowing. Of course, you can put in the sows to the lactation 7 to 10 days before. Nobody does that. I guess more just 1 day before. And in this situation, it has a negative impact on the litter growth. What can I do? I can decide to use some lactation diet. And in this situation, if I use this feed level and this diet, I should actually add about 2 kilos of lactation diet for the last week, 10 days. If I use a diet with a little higher lysine level, I should use, of course, a lower level of lactation diet. And if I decide to use the flat curve and the low lysine, then all of it should be lactation diet. So you have to switch to the lactation diet before. Otherwise, it has a negative impact on milk production. There's also another solution by adding by hand, adding some soya. It's somebody decide to do that. I will not recommend to do it because in this case you can see how much soya are you going to add. It's around 400 grams per sow per day. And if the animals are fed in groups, giving pelleted feed, for instance, and you say, okay, we have about 8 kilos of soya that we have to give together with the feed, and the sows, they don't eat exactly 400 grams, and they say, stop, you can eat the rest. No, they just eat. And in this case, actually, it can give growth to some of the animals. So it's not a very precise way of feeding your animals. You have to use a separate pipe. This hand feeding is no good. Well, I think we are a little closer to understand this puzzle. Hopefully you can see how it should be. I tried to tell you. And what is it actually I have told you? I have told you that you have to focusing on the way you feed your gilts. Otherwise, you don't have the right weight, you don't have the right back fat, and that has a negative impact on the longevity, the lifetime performance of your gilts. These are the goals you should follow: 150 to 165 kilos, 13 to 15 millimeters, and an age of about 30 to 33 weeks. When it goes to the sows, feeding extra energy does not affect the birth weight of the litter. That's very important to understand. So there's no reason for doing that. And if you have this flat feed curve, it is very good, especially in systems where you feed them on the floor or in a trough. It's a good idea. You have also less manure in the pen when you feed like this. And you actually also have more sporty sows, more agile sows, because you don't feed them very heavy in the end of the gestation period. But of course, you have to be very careful with the fat sows, especially when you feed them in these systems. When it comes to the period up to farrowing, be very careful with using extra lysine protein in this period. Otherwise, it has a negative impact on the milk production afterwards of the sow. And when we spoke earlier this day, there was one of the farmers telling us that it was just fantastic when she tried to increase the protein. The milk's just coming, and the udder was looking so good, and there was so good milking. So that's the way you should go for. Well, I think that's it. I have spent my time. So thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Gunner. I say thank you to Gunner for a nice presentation. I think we will wait with the questions until the end, together with Jakob, and then if it's okay with you, I have contact to the rest of the country, so we take the questions, and then I will say welcome to you, Jakob, and to a very interesting presentation about L-Arginine and other mysterious products. Okay, welcome.
Thank you. Honored to be invited to this forum to present some of our work. The title is Additives for High sow Performance Product or High Productivity Around the Year. And maybe actually, for me at least, more interesting, what do we actually know about L-Arginine? So I'll start with the arginine part, because that's the new stuff here. Arginine is an amino acid. We're not used to talk about it because it's not part of the most recommendations and not part of the Danish recommendations set. Some sets of recommendations, like the NIC, which is the American one, there's a commercial one from the MSD that do have some recommendations on arginine. Some talk about arginine as a semi-essential amino acid. It can be discussed whether it's a limiting or not. It has a lot of different functions, so it's important, no question about that. The question is, do we need to add it on top of what is already in the feed? Because amino acids, as you might know, is part of the protein fraction. The reasons why there's increasing speculations on arginine levels is that when we are moving away from animal-based feed materials, fish meal, meat and bone meal, and like that, plasma maybe, the arginine content of the feed will decrease because animal feed materials are naturally high in arginine. If we look at the different recommendations, I put it here as together with lysine, so we can relate a little bit better to it. But maybe the more important or interesting part is arginine as percentage of lysine, because you can, as you see, there's a close relation, no matter what level, what recommendation set, with which animal category we are talking about. But also, if we look into the different tissues, or if you will, what is the relation between arginine and lysine? And of course, if we talk about fetuses, it's much higher than in the sow body itself, and also milk does have a high content. It's not that relevant for this specific trial, because we are more looking into the early stage of gestation, where where it's maybe we're looking more into the arginine effect on building blood vessels to supply the placenta and the fetuses with the nutrients. So there's some articles out there. We're not the first ones to look into this. And just to see blood arginine in blood, not surprising that it increases when we add it to the feed. Pre-weaning piglets gain live-born, litter weight, and you can see these are the factors that we are looking into. There is an Italian article that have been diving a little bit deeper into it. We're not going to go into detail, but if you look here, gestation duration, maybe placenta weight a little bit higher, and at least there are some significances, but at least actually nothing related to the feed in this trial. Piglet body weight, well, nothing impressing, but at least this trial woke up some interest. If we look into the more productivity data, if we look at stillborn, actually this trial showed a slight increase, even though we also saw more live-born. The increase in total litter size was not enough to maintain the same level of stillborn, so actually it was a small increase as well. There was a little bit on mortality in the early stage, but nothing on the general. So when we're looking into the feed and how much we are applying on top, in the trial farm, the feed was a little bit special with corn, maize, rye, and so on, which is not that typical for this diet. So I'm just started by looking into some standard gestation feed with rapeseed or with beet pulp, typically a little bit more than 4 grams of digestible lysine per kilo. Arginine, based on table values, ends up at roughly 6.5 digestible per kilo. Lactation diet, this is a sort of little bit high lactation diet, but it follows more or less the relation. Looking into the trial farm, insemination diet, which is the one we've been working with, a little bit more than 5 grams of digestible lysine and 6.9 calculated for digestible arginine. If we assume that they on average have 2.5 kilos of feed per day, we'll end up supplying 17.3 grams of digestible arginine per day per sow. And what we did in the trial was to put 40 grams on top. So a really strong addition, maybe also too much or more than needed, but proof of concept says just make sure you have enough, not so much that it can harm the animals. So why is it interesting? What is the biology behind these hopefully bigger litters, heavier piglets? Well, when the blood vessels are formed in the placenta, this is exactly the time from insemination and the first 4 weeks. So better blood vessels theoretically could lead to more live pigs at birth, or even bigger litters in general, because the early fetus loss or embryonic loss will be decreased. A more effective placenta, bringing more nutrients to the fetuses, ending up having larger piglets. And also typically we see that large litters bring smaller pigs. Maybe it should also be able to change this ratio so it will not be as bad for the individual piglet birth weight with large litters as without arginine. So what we did, a control group, 2 batches, 2 weeks, inseminated minimum 2 weeks before the trial batches, we collected the data. And then the trial, 3 batches with 40 grams of L-Arginine per sow per day from insemination and 28 days or until they went into the group housing system. We mixed some arginine. L-Arginine is just the synthetic form, the industrial form. And it comes as a 98%. So to make sure, we did actually add 40 grams of real arginine, 82% in a mix with 50 grams applied, mixed it with gelatinized wheat, which has a sort of sweet taste. If you know Guldkorn, the breakfast cereal, it tastes a little bit like that. Not as sweet because there's no sugar in it, because we realized that the pure L-Arginine can actually have a pretty bad acceptance and palatability, so trying to make it taste a little bit better. Birth weight and sow parity, we have that now. We don't yet have the full data for wean pigs and weaning weight, and also the hernia, which was actually the initial idea from this farm to enter in this trial, to see if they could reduce the levels of hernias. So what we will be looking at is the preliminary results based on birth weight and parities, and of course also litter size. So what did we find? Again, it's preliminary, we're not done, but it looks quite interesting. Parity, we eliminated the gilts, the P1 sows, because they can mess up any data set, so we didn't want them in, and they have a different profile than the others, so we wanted to go only P2 and older, but we still maintained a sort of equal or balanced parity distribution. But what we found interesting was 0.9 more live-born piglets. The other trial I showed found 0.84, I think, so similar data. But on the contrary, we found also a reduction in the stillborn. So you could say the 0.9 is a combination of generally bigger litters and less stillborn. Looking at the, also of course that leads to a lower percentage of dead out of total born. On the body weight, on the individual pigs, we found plus 20 grams, which is of course nothing compared to what Gunnar found in the feeding curve with 30 grams just feeding the same all the way through gestation. And this was done in the old feeding curve for gestation, so I cannot conclude anything on if you're using the new feeding curve, if you will be able to see the same results. But even though we don't find any statistical differences, the interesting thing is if we look at litter weight, which is of course a combination of the born pigs and the individual weight, we actually do find significant statistically on the live pigs and tendency for if we include the stillborn pigs, so 2.5, 2.7 kilos more pigs born per litter. The hernias, we cannot conclude anything on that yet, because these are just the observed hernias at birth. So we need to wait until the end of the nursery to be able to conclude on that. If we look at this relation, this is the litter size and the individual birth weight of all total born pigs, so all pigs are include also the stillborn. You see the yellowish line here shows the correlation. It's not a good correlation, but there is some. You see there's a difference between the green and the yellowish dotted line, and this could actually indicate that there's it's this mechanism of not having the same negative effect on birth weight when having big litters if we use arginine than if we're not using arginine. So that's very interesting. It's a little bit easier to see the difference here. And this is the distribution of the birth weight, average litter birth weight, not on the individual pigs. But you see, especially these around 800 grams and less, we see a reduction, and we see more, especially here, somewhere just around 1.5 kilo piglets. So we do actually manage to move the distribution. Trying to analyze a little bit more, saying, okay, can we say anything if it's the P1, or not the P1, the P2 or the P3 and so on, if there's any parity that benefits more than others, or if there's even some parities where this could be negative. Of course, we have to be very careful because we don't have that many data. So especially the P5 and older, we're down to very few animals. So we have to be careful not to conclude too much. But there might be some interesting knowledge here saying we know that the older sows normally get more stillborn, smaller pigs. And it looks like it could actually be emphasized, be more profound when using this L-Arginine. I'm not going to speculate in why, but both on the stillbirths and also if we look at the weight, you see there's some average weight of the liveborn is also seems to drop, even though it improves, especially in P3 and P4, but it seems to actually be reduced in the older sows. Again, I think we have only something like 20 sows in each group up here, so careful to conclude too much. So what about the cost, the price? We added 40 grams per sow per day for 20 to 8 days. That's a little bit more than 1 kilo per sow. We are feeding the sows just after insemination. We know that not all inseminated sows will reach farrowing. So I multiplied with the farrowing ratio, meaning, so I'm talking about per born liter. So the cost will be 46, roughly Danish kroner per liter born. I did not include the worked hours applying the arginine on top, or if the sows need more feed because they produce more pigs and so on. So we have to keep that in mind. But the interesting number is that we can actually make roughly 4 times the cost in return, in profit on the farm. In this situation, it's sort of 30 Danish kroner per sow per year. In my opinion, anything here higher than 3 makes it worth the while. And these prices is, of course, it can change from day to day, but this should be relatively correct of what you would see out there. So conclusion, it seems that high levels superdosing arginine during this short time frame could actually increase litter size, reduce the number or the proportion of stillborn piglets, and maybe also increase the individual, but at least the litter birth weight. It's possible, at least for the younger P3, 4 sows. And it's profitable because you have in my mind, a very good return of investment. But of course, the cost will be slightly higher because here we did it for 28 days. If you want to include it in a feed, you might add it just from the day of weaning until the day they leave the insemination room. So that'll be maybe 35 days. So you will spend some money for the 1 week that you maybe do not get a big return, but it will still be attractive. And then remember the whole thing about the palatability, the taste. And also, it might seem to be a little bit cheaper to buy the pure L-Arginine, but there's some legal stuff about having what is called a HACCP, Hazard Analysis and Critical Control Point system on farm to be allowed to use the pure L-Arginine. I don't know a lot of farmers who think it's fun to have the authorities coming and checking up on them and so on. So that's why we also made a sort of a feed material version of this that also addresses this palatability issue. Yeah, well, that was what I said here. So it's, but this product we need to ask a minimum order of 800 kilo, because that's, we need to have a certain filling of the mixer to be able to mix products. But if you say 800 kilos in a 1,000 sow farm, if you feed it for 28 days, this should be sufficient for 11.5 weeks. If you feed it for 35 days, it's for 9 weeks. So there's not an issue to actually use it before it gets too old. Yeah. Good. That was what I had on arginine. So let's continue to all the other stuff. It'll be even faster. Maybe you think this was fast. But for the home mixers, I'm going to address you specifically, because too many home mixers, not everybody, but too many still, are not doing this correctly. They're missing so much, but not analyzing the cereals, not getting the formulations adjusted, and using old strategies. And especially in harvest time, hygiene, cleaning the silos, especially hygiene if you have liquid feeding. Storage, if we have an example with for almost 18% humidity in the cereals, now that's not good enough. It's almost, I would say, it's not worth feeding to the pigs, because there can be so much going wrong with this cereal. So, yeah, and this is much more important than everything else I can mention here. So get this under control, then we can start talking about the other things. Toxin binders are maybe one of the fastest growing products in the Danish pig market for the last few years. Often also, even if we cannot show the presence of any toxins. But a lot of farmers experience a more stable production when using toxin binders continuously at a low level, like an insurance policy. Most of the good toxin binders contain yeast products, and we know that yeast products have beneficial influence on the digestive system. Yeasts can be live or dead. Typically in the toxin binders, they are dead, but live yeasts are in the category of gut stabilizers, also sometimes called probiotics. We're not allowed to use that word anymore. But in this category, we also have the bacteria-based products. And sometimes if there are some issues with bad feed intake, poor milk production, adding in a gut stabilizer will actually help. Acids, the citric acid for urinary infections, discharges are very common, well known, has been there for ages. It works, but not because it acidifies urine, maybe because it makes the sows drink more. If we want to acidify the urine, we should go for benzoic acid, which in turn, especially relevant for the liquid feed, also works against yeasts and molds if you have problems with that. You could also turn to calcium chloride, but I would not particularly recommend that, because unless you bundle it specially, it has an extremely poor palatability. It's so disgusting. Don't go there. Both benzoic and especially calcium chloride also manipulates what is called the electrolyte balance. Theory is that it can initiate the milk production in a better way. It's been used for ages in dairy production. Never really been documented to have an effect in pig production. Organic trace minerals, the old known story is about beta clause. It's been around for, 20 plus, 25 plus years. But no, some of the new knowledge is that we can also, when we use the organic trace minerals for sows, we see better feed intake, we see less body weight loss during lactation, lower cell counts in the milk, better piglet immune status, and better productivity in general. This is just a few data from a trial comparing inorganics with a mix of organic and inorganics, and only organics and at a low level. This is more, theoretically, this should be more environmental friendly because there's less trace minerals released to the environment. And if we look, farrowing rate, litter size, sow mortality, piglet mortality, everything improves when we use organic trace minerals. Heat stress is another issue. We probably will start seeing the first articles in the papers around now, because now we have to start thinking about it. The short story is that pigs have a sort of a thermo-optimal zone. And it's different depending on the age of the pigs. And the biggest issue is that the sows in the farrowing room have a much lower optimal temperature than the piglets. And if we cannot manage to the piglet nests to keep the piglets there and the sows keep cooler and so on, we tend to be concerned about the piglets, and that stresses the sows. Pigs cannot sweat. They are a little bit like dogs in that way. They have a few sweat glands on the nose, but otherwise they need to do panting to get rid of the heat. So what they will do, which is more effective for the sows, is simply to eat less, because digesting feed produces heat. So if there's not so much feed in the gut, there's a lower heat production. What we will see in turn is lower milk production, more body weight loss, and finally we could also see what is called leaky gut. That is, in the gut, the cells, they stick together, and if they, under heat stress, they will open up a little bit, which means all kind of bad stuff can go from the gut into the bloodstream, and we don't want that. If we look into advice on how to counteract or work with heat stress, well, the cheapest and maybe the best is to make sure they drink plenty of water. This means easy access, good quality water. Even in Denmark, that could be an issue sometimes. Some say more concentrated feed, others say to reduce protein content. Those two does not really comply, but the thing is that the protein is the nutrient that produces most heat at digestion. Then switch from starch to fat based on the energy part, and this about the electrolyte balance. This is where the calcium chloride could come in, but again, I would not recommend that too much. You really need to know what you're doing if you're playing around with that. Vitamin C reduces stress hormones. Betaine maintains on the cell level the water balance across the cell membrane. And then again, organic trace minerals will more both stimulate the antioxidant systems and the gut wall integrity, this leaky gut thing. And you might be thinking, yeah, but it's not hot in Denmark, especially if you come from abroad where we will see much higher temperatures. But remember, inside the farms, you will typically see 2 to 4 degrees higher than outside. And also humidity adds to it. So this temperature is more the experienced temperature. And if you look here, these are the months in Denmark where you would typically experience inside the farm temperatures of that. So you should actually optimally start around May through to September with this strategy. Good. Another trial we did a few years ago, a little bit the same procedure as we did in the L-Arginine trial, with something called lysophospholipid. Again, short theory, these are phospholipids, these are lysophospholipids. You can see there's a difference. The one misses one leg. They are part of the cell membranes. If there's a few of those who loses or misses one leg, they become more flexible, which should mean that the cells are more efficient in taking up energy and nutrients. Very short. We found not a lot of difference. Some things, a few things could be interesting, but actually on the birth weight we saw a negative impact. On the other hand, on the Brix value, the immunoglobulins in the colostrum, we actually saw a significant improvement. And also, if we looked on back fat, there was also a very significant improvement on back fat. This, I wouldn't put too much effort on it, even though these numbers look nice out here, but this was a little bit more simple. But maybe at the end, we concluded that the product was too expensive to actually be paid or relevant with these findings, so we didn't do anything more on that. Then we also come to the beta-glucans or MRF products, which means mannan-rich fractions. It's sort of related to the yeast products. We did a trial not long ago saying we found a little bit on the live-born and also not statistically, but some of the numbers look quite interesting as well. We cannot put any statistics, but it also looks like there is something on the litter weight more on the number than on the individual weight. But it could also, and there are also some very nice data in this trial on the microbiome, the composition of the bacteria in the gut, which is also possibly positively influenced. So other stuff, aroma. There's a story about something called imprinting, that if you feed a specific aroma to the sow during gestation and lactation, then the pigs will have a preference when they have to eat their own feed for a specific aroma, so you can sort of make them eat more. Very nice theory, maybe works in the lab. I've never seen it work in the real life. Plant extracts in one, there's a lot out there. And the most general thing I can say is most of them work if you use enough and spend enough money, but also most of them are not worth the money, because if they're going to end up at a price that you want to pay, then you have to reduce the inclusion, and then it doesn't work. So there's many ways to waste money. But on the other hand, make your own experiences. If you hear stories, if you talk to somebody you believe in, that they have some positive experience, I'm not going to keep you from trying, but be very critical. Make the numbers. Don't just do it because somebody says it works. Make your own experience. Try to find out a way to record numbers, weigh the pigs or whatever, and find out if it's worth the money. Otherwise, move it out again. Yeah, I think that was it.
Yeah, thank you for that, Jakob. Way through the jungle of mysterious products, and there's lots of them, indeed. And also thank you to Gunner for his nice presentation about the feeding curves. It's funny. Like it changes. Like 4 or 5 years ago, we got new recommendations, and now it's new again. So our work never stops. That's fine. Yeah, thank you for that. So if you have any questions from the room here, and also I have the chat on my phone. If there should be any questions from out there, please don't hesitate to bring them here. Otherwise, I have a few. Just a few. But Jakob, I fully agree about the heat in Denmark. Maybe some people would say, it's more warm in the southern part of, or eastern part of Europe. But indeed, we do have heat issues here, and also the ventilation system, diffuse ventilation, air coming on top of the roof through the room, it can really be heated up there. So in the summertime, we do indeed have heat problems there, and I fully believe that this heat stress is a problem here in Denmark too. So do you have some inspiration from Spain, for example? This betaine, is it used down there, or how's that?
Actually, there's not much. Spain is, from my experience, a country where they focus extremely much on simple feeds with not too many additives, which might be why they are sometimes. It also reflects, without sort of making down anybody, it also reflects often the management level, which cannot be compared to what we see in Denmark. So it's sort of more the American way, keep it simple, keep it low cost. So no, betaine is not widely used from my experience in Spain. But if you look into the literature, you find a lot on betaine, you find a lot on electrolytes, especially Australia, which also no heat. And believe it or not, they also have pig production. I've been there myself, out in the bush, 50 degrees. So yes, it can be an issue. So I would say I would go for the combination. So.
Thank you. And for your L-Arginine project, you from DLG have made this suplex arginine. Does it mean, since you have put this wheat in it, does it mean you don't have to have the HCCP? Okay, that's fine. So
just
we can.
Quick comment. It's like that. If you have an additive, which is the definition of something that needs HCCP, then if you mix it with 2 other feed materials, and how much, it's a little bit open. It does not. There's no specific directions to that. So we have added in a little bit of salt, a little bit of lime, and then this wheat, and then it's suddenly a feed material. Super. Or what's it called? I forgot the word. Hvad er det nu tilskudsfoder her? Complementary feed, there it was. So it's not a feed material, it's a complementary feed.
Yeah, okay. Well, that's a nice pragmatic solution, I would say. Super, thank you for that. And for you, Gunnar, I think this it's very interesting with this flat feed curve. I believe we have indeed some farms now using this, and they are happy about it. And I fully agree, it's not only the results on the piglets, we also need to look at the results on the sows and the pregnancy period. And I believe this is one of the tools we can use to reduce the sow mortality, which is a big problem in these loose house groupings. I believe this flat feed curve can help us here. How do you see that? Do you have data on that, on sow mortalities?
Actually, in the study, we haven't seen effect, but still saying something about mortality takes a lot of sows. But especially if you have electronic sow feeders, and you maybe have little too many sows, and you are increasing the feed intake, it gives you a lot of problems. So by having the same feed curve, you can also have the same amount of sows at the feed curves. What we can see when we look into the papers, that normally, in most cases, you have a higher mortality with the high pregnant sows. And I guess it could have something to do with the feed, could also have something to do with the increased feed we do 3-4 weeks before pairing. I guess it can have something to do with it. But I don't have figures for it. But I have my common sense, and I guess it is so. Yeah.
Yeah, and I see it maybe also in the mid-period with less fightings because we have a higher feed intake there. So, yeah. Well, I think that was all from my side. Any questions now from the group? And I see on the chat there's no further questions there. So here from Fokus and from Odense, I will say thank you to you, Jakob and Gunnar. Thank you for nice presentations. And to you out there, and also in Agerskov, and I know on Hinsholm, and Veflinge, and other places. You come, have a nice trip home, and thank you for this time. And hopefully we'll see you all at Fokus year meeting here at May 6th. Make a big cross in the calendar. We'll make a great evening there. So, okay, thank you.